Yeah, okay.
Still
Excuse
nobody
me.
knows how to use it.
Thank you.
Right.
Well, we're gonna move over one.
Building 27.
Bronston.
I hope, first of all, thank you for coming. Thank you for coming. I hope that nobody leaves here the way they came. I want to make sure that if somehow this is a successful 2 hours, that you will be changed somehow in terms of your personal sense of engagement and dedication to justice and the transformation that is going to impact all of us in the next 10 years. I wanted you to see the 50-year-old slideshow to just show you that there is no such thing as mental retardation. There's just inhumane crimes against humanity that crush people. People were crushed by their environment. And the people who worked there were crushed by the environment. And the people who ran the state made money from crushing people and commodifying them and concentrating them and then billing Medicaid to fund the crimes. And they have never yet publicly apologized or in any way taken responsibility for this incredible concentration camp system in America that preceded the series of 37 state federal class action lawsuits that grew out of the work of parent advocacy, lawyer advocacy, wonderful progressive educators and so forth. Willowbrook, as it was, doesn't exist anymore. But all of us in this room are headed to our own Willowbrook in the terminus of our lives because the Social Security Act has in it Title 19 that created Medicaid funding for out-of-home placement for anybody who had a dependent member of their family. That means that by law, a policy decision was made by men to establish a domestic refugee population in America which surrounds us today, all around us, our elders, parents, grandparents that are part of our family are, unless the state has a waiver program, which there are not many, are stuck in segregated, congregated warehouse systems, no matter how good they may be from here to there. They are fundamentally anti-family and anti-social, just like this monstrosity was. All that Willowbrook was a big cancer of what all of us are going to experience in our lifetimes and our families' lifetimes because of man-made law and man-made policy. And that policy must be changed. I think that it was interesting listening to Chris talk about how even Bernard could demonstrate what a person with a disability could become. We're in an institution of higher learning that's committed to make sure that everybody can become a Bernard in society. And that Bernard is no different than anybody else except that he's different like everybody else. Our whole language is shot through with ancient stereotypes that are totally stigmatizing, that diminish and dehumanize people where expectations and image rule the day. The reason that could happen was that when people walked in there, they believed that the Bernards laying on the floor were there because of some intrinsic problem in the individual. They didn't see that it was the steel doors, the terrazzo floors, the lack of staff, the lack of money, the lack of any kind of enlightened administration from the operation of the institution all the way to the governor's office was totally responsible for the image of their acceptance of this kind of dehumanizing cruelty that's imposed upon people. And it's in a continuum. It's in a continuum. Everybody in this room knows that at some level, some family member is undergoing some kind of humiliating, insulting, dehumanizing experience that's thought to be okay because of our language and because of the way in which we look at the world and the way in which we accept and embrace doctors, medicine, health, medical system delivery. I'm going to take you to a solution before I finish. But I want you to kind of sit with, for a minute or two, the implications of why people went there to work, dealt with the situation they dealt with, and were terrified of speaking out, and became part of the problem because Willowbrook was a multi-million-dollar commodity center. In-flowed drugs, in-flowed soap, in-flowed towels, blankets, sheets, in-flowed food, in-flowed every conceivable kind of support matter to keep folks in the place. Every person that was in the place was drawing Medicaid money. And the reality of the situation was that when the governor decided to build the Albany Palace, the Marble and Gold Palace, he cut the budget and created a budget freeze so he could squeeze the money out to make his monument. Nelson, Rockefeller. The whole institutional system in New York, the university system, the community mental health system, the housing system was all created in Albany with $1 billion front-end commitment of dollars that Nelson extracted from the legislature to slowly but surely sell bonds using his brother's bank, David's Chase Manhattan Bank and Goldman Sachs, to move tax-exempt bonds to the general public to fund all the buildings, all the public buildings in New York State. And many of the buildings that were the deviant buildings like Brooklyn and Broome and so on and so forth, where people with, devalued people were put out in the middle of nowhere, which was able to generate industry in very rural parts of the state to link people to the Republican Party. And the lawyers and the builders and the contractors that created this place had no idea in the world how the hell they were going to staff them or what they were going to do in terms of using them properly. They just labeled them as a state school for mental retardation. And out it went. And so it didn't matter whether there was nobody working in these places, they filled them up with people. They filled them with the unwanted. Because New York State had $0 in community-based services in the state. Zero community services. There was no group home in the state of New York while they were still building these institutions until the lawsuit happened. There was no alternative. Parents either had to keep their kid at home at enormous cost at all levels, emotional, physical, financial, family, or they had to give them up to these concentration camps. And they were incentivized to do that. And the state not having an alternative for people that had problems, and the school system who excluded any kid that was different, that didn't fit the school, wound up somewhere else except where they belonged as a growing child. So somehow or another, we are still grappling with, every day, today, the same problems that we were grappling with then, and that is that we have a whole population of very different people that stress the state, that stress the community, that create challenges because they're remarkably different. And the consequence is that the society is brutalized by the policies, the public policies created by white old men dominate our society. Excuse the identification, but what can I tell you? Some of us partly escape. I think that, like the African American community, the community of people that have been institutionalized deserve reparations because their lives have been destroyed. They have been withdrawn from the economy, withdrawn from society, withdrawn from community, withdrawn from love, withdrawn from family at an impossible cost. And what's interesting is that when you have a child or a relative with a really significant difference, bringing that person into life transforms society. Everybody around that index person is somehow stretched. They're somehow made to understand that there's something different about society. Isn't slick and luxurious and Elle magazine and Vogue magazine and People magazine. Society is the way we live it. We live it in this room, and the people that we know live it. It's complicated. It's not particularly happy all the time. And in urban life, there's not a lot of family connections because that's the nature of urban society compared to some of the other worlds around on the planet where people are still connected to the earth. They're still growing food. They know where food comes from. You know, their families are involved with them at all sorts of levels of production, whether it's crafts or whether it's food or whatever. You know, in our society, we have a whole different situation that exists that makes holding on to each other hard. And we have no political power through the normal government apparatus. We can protest, we can have polls, but if what we want and need as a public base does not contribute to money flowing north in large amounts into the small oligarchy, we can go to hell. There has to be an understanding that the only way we're going to transform the Willowbrooks of this society is through law, through a new democracy that we have to generate. The thing that worries me is, I mean, look, this is 50 years old. I can't even believe it. I can't believe that it's been 50 years. Luann and Buglioni took me around the Willowbrook Mile today to show me the buildings. And it just made me so sad. We didn't look at the damn buildings. We were inside. We were where the people were. We were inside, dealing with suffering that you can't imagine. Michael and I, trying to normalize the situation and not knowing whether anybody would ever get out of there. The only way people left was feet first. I mean, literally, they were hostages. They were public hostages. They were there because the state made money by keeping them there. And the more we were able to certify that they were severely or profoundly disabled, the more money the state got. And there were 60 buildings. There were 6,000 people incarcerated here with 2,000 workers. Do the arithmetic, 3 shifts a day, 60 buildings, 6,000 people. So when you look at the level of human contact, just touch. I mean, nobody touched anybody. Everybody was a potential source of some kind of rare disease or hepatitis or filth that was essentially created by the place. So when you congregate and segregate people that are devalued, they become more devalued, and the whole ethos of the place, the spirit of the place, becomes absolutely inhumane. It becomes a crime against humanity that has yet to be properly adjudicated. Not that the courts have not, in a very powerful way, interdicted some of this through the court orders, the Olmsted decision that was made that established a standard in the nation of meaningful integration into society. Public Law 94-142, which was the Education for All Handicapped Children's Act, preceded Olmsted and set up a policy that said from now on, for a tiny group of people called developmentally disabled, that only included 5 diagnoses, not every kid in America, but just this small group, had to have the school fit the kid rather than the kid fit the society, and that exclusions from public school was illegal, which put a whole lot of parent organizations out of business because they were forced by the abdication of the state to provide lifetime services for their children, which essentially broke them as powerful advocates because they had to take money from the source of the evil in the first place in order to keep their kids in some kind of a program that the system essentially rejected out of hand. And so the Willowbrooks grew, and Brooklyn State grew, and Gouverneur grew, and Broome State was built, and the other 60, in the time that we were working over a period of 3 or 4 years, 25 new places that had a minimum of 200 beds were built before the lawsuit. And the people that ran Willowbrook had black limousines, and they were heart-wrenchingly committed to making sure that the best services were possible here at Willowbrook, which they said over and over again every time they went public. Jack Hammond, Milton Jacobs, who was his assistant, Manny Sternlicht, who was the psychologist, the nurses that ran the institution were killers. They didn't really realize it, but they were killers because the death rate here was 10 times the death rate of New York City, which ain't no, cakewalk on the outside. So I can't begin to tell you. First of all, you know what awful is. We know what awful is, except that we live in awful and we're oblivious to it because it's not called awful and it's not exposed as awful. But the institutional system in America still has a river of Title XIX Medicaid money going into it that sustains it, and this gigantic trillion dollar plus industry that's now controlled by fewer and fewer major monopolies, corporate oligarchs that run all the hospitals and the pharmaceutical companies and the hospice centers, so on and so forth, shrinking down with this gigantic flood of money. And people say the system is broken. The system is not broken under any circumstances. These systems aren't broken, they just don't work for us, right? They work for somebody, and nothing happens by accident. I tell you, if you don't know now, nothing happens by accident in the political society. Everything is planned and serves somebody fabulously. And if it doesn't serve them fabulously, fixing it would be very threatening to them. And they are a small, tiny minority in America. And they don't want a government to be a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. They do not want that. Because if that is the case, all of a sudden, their oil industry gets regulated, and they don't want their oil industry regulated, and they want to clean up the toxic sludge and mess that they've created at a staggering level all over the planet. And the only force that can deal with that kind of criminality is a government. And so the government has to be absolutely negated. And that has been the case since 1980. There has been a consistent campaign on the part of extremely smart and extremely selfish and extremely greedy people to obliterate the significance of government and to seed government with corruption, so that we see the self-fulfilling prediction that government is worthless when we see the kind of people that wind up in government that use government for self-aggrandizement and wealth and abuse of power. But that's not all that government is. Government is sitting in this room. We are, by the Constitution of America, the meaningful government of America. And we're in a position, through our networks, through our churches, through our social organizations, through our families, through the places that we work, through our unions, and so on and so forth, to open up conversations, serious, meaningful conversations about justice, about caring, about tenderness in the world, about meaning in our lives, about safety for our families and our children, about economic development. People are talking about creating some kind of a minimum wage of $15 a couple, 3 years from now. $15 doesn't support anything. The people who worked at Willowbrook got more than $15 an hour, and they got benefits because they were state workers. So it was very important to them and their unions to keep these places alive. All over America, all over America, there were institutions where people were put away. People with developmental disabilities, quote unquote, and of course people with mental illness, quote unquote. People that were too different, and in which the school system, the healthcare system, which doesn't exist because you can't buy health at any price in America, you can only buy medical care in America, didn't exist to be able to handle and take care of and support families that essentially were challenged with having to figure out how to turn somebody enormously different into a contributing and vibrant citizen in the society, and to bring value to everything around them through the radiation of their quality. Willie's daughter is 63 years old. 63 years old. She's in this room with us. She is our sister. She is a member of our family. And her life validates our lives. A society that by any means, through family or whatever, can make sure that a young woman grows into maturity, lives, and is able to be part of the life like this, brings value to all of us. How boring to just be ordinary. How boring to just be one of everybody. So people don't get that each of us is remarkably, incredibly, brilliantly different. And each one of us brings something uniquely special and profound and beautiful to everything around you, even though you may be a nag or may be angry or may feel that, you're not doing it. Trust me, you're doing it. Somebody loves you. Somebody loves what you stand for, who you're all about. And that has to be everybody. We have to get rid of labels. For example, long-term care. We have to get rid of long-term care and change the concept to lifetime care. Same acronym, totally different paradigm. We're talking about making sure that people with special needs, that means you and I, sooner or later, you and I, are treated with absolute respect, never lose our identity, never lose our name, never get put into a stereotype group like the elderly or something like that or whatever, old people, the aged. You don't want to be labeled. You want to be maintained. Nelson Rockefeller was never considered aged, right? He had his name till the end. And So I think that we can think about, in a true healthcare system where healthcare is a right, a way of serving people from birth till terminus on an individualized basis, and provide the support to make sure that families and communities can provide a normalized existence, cherish, respect, and regard, and celebrate all of us. I don't want to go down in a nursing home. I'm 80. I don't want to go to a nursing home. I don't want to be put into a Willowbrook. I don't want to see the parents who are the warriors who moved the 6,000 people in federal court into the light go down themselves into a nursing home just like the kids that they emancipated. I don't want to see the kids who are now in their 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s, wind up back in incarcerated situations where they're flotsam and jetsam, they're Soylent Green as far as America is concerned. And that spirit, that agenda, that commitment has to come from us. You have limitless power if you think about how you want to work your voice, how you want to work your friends, how you want to communicate, what you want to belong to, what you want to join, what you want to participate in. There are struggles going on out there of such consequence that they dwarf Willowbrook. Willowbrook is just a metaphor for man's inhumanity to man, but you don't have to go very far. You can go to Iraq, you can go to Afghanistan, you can go to Yemen, you can go to Syria. I mean, you can go to Venezuela, and you see mayhem. Mostly white men killing other people or providing the means to kill other people. So Willowbrook is an incredible example, a model for us to take heart, really to take heart in our lives. The thing that concerns me is, where's the leadership? Where's the leadership? The parent organizations that existed in the 70s, 60s and 70s that fought against the systemic abuse to them aren't there anymore. The great leaders, the great spokespeople for transformation, I don't know any. I mean, there's no really top voice to speak on our behalf. And maybe that's okay. Maybe it's not some superstar that's out there, in the front that gets the responsibility of making the change, because the system has a way of gunning those people down. And so the leadership has to be distributed through all of us. We have to find ways to be able to write, to create theater in our lives, to create the necessary organizations that carry out the proper conversations, to be able to look at the most important things that will transform society. So today, the issue isn't Willowbrook or mental retardation. The issue is universal health care. The issue is climate change. The issue is immigration. The issue is war. Nobody talks about or writes about the fact that we're spending $1 trillion a week of our money to wage war at the periphery of the empire, just like Rome. Just like Rome. Rome fought in this gigantic circle a zillion miles away from the city, and nothing went into the city but the games. I'm sorry to say. The games distracted the crucial elements of society, the youth, from dealing with what was happening in the city, and little by little money turned the tide so that people could buy the empire, and things went to hell. America is fighting wars all around the perimeter of the planet and providing us with games at a very real level. And that means that we have to transform Washington. I'm not calling for revolution, although that's my shtick. What I'm saying is that the 2020 election will provide us with a step. One interesting example of that is that a woman named Priyapal Jayapal has produced a piece of legislation in the Congress. She is a congresswoman from Washington State. And she has created this beautiful healthcare as a right, single-payer piece of legislation, which she has essentially involved in the House with about 110 co-sponsors in the House. The House has about 460 or so people. I'm not sure, a lot of folks. Of course, no Republicans are supporting her legislation. Nevertheless, we've been working with her. The Nurses Association, the National Nurses Union has been working with her. SEIU, AFSCME, the major unions, the major doctor organizations, my organization, the Physicians for a National Health Program, have been working with her, and the bill is almost perfect. It really is amazing. And its thrust is essentially to establish a comprehensive, local, quality, individualized, rightful access for care, guaranteed care for every man, woman, and child in America, including people who are undocumented. If they're residents of the United States, they get the services. The entire thing would be covered by taxes. All the money that we need in the world is already in the system. We don't have to come up with a new dollar to make sure everybody's covered. And we would have zero out-of-pocket expenses. No premiums, because we would outlaw the insurance industry, outlaw the middleman across the board that's taking 30% of all of the value that should be going into healthcare. Except there's another problem, just parenthetically, we don't have a healthcare system. All we have is a medical wellness system. Doctors don't know what health is. People know what health is. People can tell doctors what they need to be healthy. Doctors can tell you how to get rid of your illnesses and make you well, that is to get you to the 0 point. So there have to be major conversations between educators, engineers, psychologists, social workers, community organizers, unions, church organizations, to describe, to think about what's an ideal primary care system that's right by your house. Because if it's not right by your house and you have to leave your neighborhood to go somewhere else because the system has concentrated the wealth and the hospitals in larger and larger local complexes that make it harder and harder to get to, and then they essentially waive Medicaid eligibility for some of these big hospitals. My major state hospital in California, the University of California, which has hospitals all over the state, doesn't take Medicaid. How is that possible? For the People's University, for the People's Hospital System, to not take Medicaid. University of California, Davis doesn't take Medicaid. And they're wealthy beyond wealthy. And the people at the top are making $2, $3, $4 million, whatever it is, which is just a pittance. The pharmaceutical industry guys are making billions of dollars personally, on a regular basis. So we're in a situation where with Jayapal's bill, we have an instrument which won't work until after the election in 2020 to absolutely create a rightful system that everybody in America needs to understand. Now, the relevance of that is that everything that's hurting us here, almost everything that's hurting us here, would be fixed if we organized to support single payer in America. There is a bill in New York right now. It's passed your assembly 4 times. It did not get through the Senate because the Senate had a Republican majority. The Republican majority is interested in making money as opposed to providing a public good. It's not, everybody knows that. That's just the way it is. However, the Republican Senate majority no longer exists. You now have a Democratic majority in your Senate. And it's possible that with a Democratic majority in the House and a Democratic in your Assembly and a Democratic majority in your Senate, that you may be able to pass that bill and put it on Cuomo's desk. Then what's going to happen? Cuomo says he can't pay for it. There's not enough money in New York State to pay if he doesn't get a reimbursement from the feds of Medicare and Medicaid money, CHIP money, Child Health Improvement money, program money, in order to make sure that he has a complete a pool of dollars in order to be the single payer for all New Yorkers. I'm sure that's not true. And I'm sure that saying that he can't pay for it isn't really the issue, because I believe that the New York bill does not have a financial mechanism articulated in it. Its purpose is to establish the policy of rightful health care for everybody. And then once the people have agreed that that's what is crucial for them, then the next step will be to figure out how to pay for the damn thing. Nobody asks anybody in the government, how are we going to pay for Iraq? That question does never come up. It never comes up. How are we going to pay for Afghanistan? How are we going to pay for what's going on in Venezuela? So the way to deal with this situation is to have the confidence in your community that the justice of universal health care, the righteousness of universal health care, the mercy and tenderness, the appropriateness, the morality of it, the ethics of it, has to be held tightly and embraced, and it is ours. It's a people's policy. And it will cut that Title 19 chain of money going to out-of-home placement, because we have to redefine how our communities embrace and hold on to and serve our elders without people bleeding to make it happen, because they have to stop work and they have to deal, with problems that go up, and so they desperately need to have some help. The only help they can get is paying down so that their elder can afford Medicaid to poverty level, and then getting them out of the house. Not because you necessarily want them out of the house, but there isn't a circle of support in the house because everybody's got 1 or 2 jobs or 3 jobs or whatever, and the burden, the economic burden, is impossible. But why are we having this economic burden? Why don't we have the resources in the society and the distribution of support services and a massive investment in the care worker community? Because right now, 44 million of you are in the United States are providing unpaid care for dependent members of your family. 44 million people are taking care of people at their expense with no reimbursement. You're talking about $15 an hour. That's been costed out in New York. $11 million that would be saved by having universal health care in the state of New York would immediately cover the cost of all these unpaid care workers, who would be starting to get dollars because the policy would change to provide true community-based, I'm not talking about facility-based, community-based home care for people with special needs. And we are all absolutely, A, sitting here now, people with special needs, and B, if you don't know it soon, you're going to know it soon, that you're going to be a person with special needs. All of us. We have to change the language. We have to change our agenda. The question is, where is the leadership going to come from? It haunts me. I don't know. I'm finished. I got maybe another 10 years, whatever it is, I'm going to croak. Where are the courageous, charismatic, articulate, genuine folks? I mean, Willie Mae is one of those people, but she's trapped at some level managing a delivery system, a survival delivery system for her family and her community. And it's hard for her to get on the stump to go take care of business like she did when she was a youngster and this beautiful babe that I knew 50 years ago. Not that she's not a beautiful babe now, but then she was a killer, even more than she is today. I mean, I direct the comment to her because she's a sister of ours. She's blood to us. Her courage and the work that she's doing transforms our society to be a better place. So, where are the advocacy groups? The bureaucracy here in New York just is like a rubber band. No matter how much you stretch it, it snaps back to its original iniquity. They put a guy in charge of mental retardation. His name is Kastner. He's got this spectacular resume. I mean, he's just done everything. He's in disabilities, he's in universities, you know. I don't get why the bureaucracy has decided to get another mental health a medical guy to define and be the model service paradigm for our community. We are not sick. Sickness is a sidecar to quality of life. Wellness doesn't give you quality of life, it just gives you the ground in order to begin to develop quality of life, right? So something's wrong in New York in terms of why the system is going right back to the way it was when we fought them and we forced the people with developmental service needs into an independent bureaucracy, the Office of Mental, whatever it was, OOMD or whatever the hell, they've changed it 20 times. They keep reorganizing so that you don't know, it's a moving target, you don't know really where to shoot your arrow. So it would be nice if Kastner was here. I would love to have a debate with him and discuss. I have no doubt that he's a knowledgeable and good man. No doubt about it, except he should not accept the job. He should be a consultant to an education maven. Because the issue here is learning how to be extraordinary in society. That's the job of the school system. Now you can tell me the school system is in rotten shape also, and that there is this absolute oppression, repression of the teaching community at all sorts of levels. It's true. But we've got a job to do. We've let it happen. It's crept up on us. It's crept up on us. And we have to begin to look at which youth that understands how to use this box is going to call together the million people to make the move for the change. The children did it around the Parkland shooting. They put 1 million people on the street in Washington, almost overnight. Nobody over 18 said anything on that stage. Those were all children, our children. So this little girl that's being attacked because she's somewhere on the autism spectrum, that organized probably another 1 million kids all around the world to address climate change. We have to figure out how the campaign for climate change is the right place for us to be organizing around what we want to organize around here. The issue here is building a mass public movement. That's the objective. How that movement essentially asserts its ethical imperative, changes as the situation changes. We know that the battle for mental retardation doesn't compare to the battle to get rid of fossil fuels in our society. We know that we are on a very short cord to extinction as a people in the foreseeable future if we go up 2 degrees Celsius on the planet, and we're already close to that. We know, the scientists know. So how is the quality of life for our community tied to the climate change struggles so that you can bring this agenda into the conversation that you have with the climate change organizers that are around you? How does this deal with the whole question of who's going to become a candidate for public office at the school level, at the city level, at the county level, at the state level, at the federal level? How do we get our children competent to use this box? For the last 20 years, I've been organizing high school kids in my community, 70 high schools in 8 counties, to produce 2 major youth-driven film festivals. 1,000 kids come to my film festival. It's all done by kids. They jury, they make the movies. I'm talking about US and Canada, and the film festival is in Sacramento. In all the time that I've had this incredible army of children come, who are becoming more and more competent in telling the critical stories in society with their media chops, have I seen one kid in a wheelchair. 20 years, thousands of kids in media classes in high school, no kid with a real sharp difference is among the producers of media. And we know that these tools are, for our community, very emancipatory and very empowering. So there are some things that need to be done here in terms of building a movement for change that's got to employ hundreds and thousands of kids that are competent in public media communication. It is a crucial agenda. They've got to be able to know how to produce radio, how to produce television, how to produce Instagram, how to create Facebook, how to deal with the technology that reaches the millions. And somehow that's not happening. It's not happening right now. So there are places for all of you to really see and somehow work at rethinking rather than suffering with the underdevelopment that you experience and the humiliation and the frustration and the depression that you experience from dealing with everyday life in the system that is so inured, so impersonal, so rejecting of passion, so rejecting of dreams, so rejecting of ideals, so rejecting of ethical action. Willowbrook is our proof positive. It's as low almost as you get in America. And being able to stand on that foundation of sacrifice and abuse, I think, provides the sense of direction, the sense of purpose, the sense of mission, the sense of vision that I'm inviting you to essentially deal with. The New York Health Act, the New York Health Act, is where every single buddy in this room needs to go in order to read it and to understand it, because it now includes comprehensive coverage for long-term care for free. Now, when I say free, that means no out-of-pocket money from us, other than that we would pay taxes, and that the taxes would be set up on a progressive basis, so that the more you made, the more taxes you would essentially spend. But when people say, well, this is going to cost us, $1 trillion or whatever they come up with, in California they say, oh my God, the single payer is going to cost $400 billion in California. That's 4 times more than the whole state budget. It's bullshit. The money's already there. We're not talking about new money. We're talking about redirecting the existing money and making it work so that we have essentially enormous savings to begin with, A, and B, are able to then spread the savings to make sure everybody has comprehensive, rightful care where they can get anything they need from any California, New York licensed professional. I'm not saying doctor, professional. That means a massage, that means chiropractic, whatever, psychological services, whatever, all mental health, all vision services, all hearing services, all habilitation services, all transportation services included in the rightful delivery system for the whole thing. And all it will do will be to ask you to rearrange how you're spending a small piece of your money that will have to go into a public treasury rather than into a private pocket where 30% of it gets ripped off the top. So outside there is a document that says, don't we all have the right to health care, which is the healthcare system laid out. It says our healthcare system is broken. I didn't write it. The healthcare system is rigged against working people. Now Washington makes it worse. And then they talk about freedom to choose your own provider, comprehensive coverage, paid for fairly, where the savings come from, they define, job friendly. By the way, if you don't have to hold on to some crummy ass job in order to get some sliver of medical coverage, that creates a whole opportunity for a tremendous burst of entrepreneurism in the society. There are people who are doing worthless work, mind-numbing work, maybe standing outside of one of these big box stores as a security guard. I mean, give me a break. What kind of dehumanizing work do people have to tolerate rather than having the freedom to go out and do what you need to do because you don't have to depend upon that particular source in order to provide some sort of medical care for yourselves. So I want you to pick this up. A group called the Consortium for Citizens with Disabilities has essentially outlined the whole set of principles for what would constitute a legitimate single-payer long-term care system. They haven't gotten to lifetime care yet, but listen to the organizations that signed off on this. Allies for Independence, American Academy of Physical Medicine and Rehab, the American Association of Peoples with Disabilities, American Association on Health and Disabilities, American Association on Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, the American Dance Therapy Association, the Association of People Supporting Employment First, Autism Society of America, Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, Brain Injury Association of America, Center for Public Representation, Justice and Aging, Lakeshore Foundation, Lutheran Services in America Disability Network, National Association of State Directors of Developmental Disability Services, National Association of Councils on Developmental Disabilities, National Association of State Head Injury Administrators, National Disability Rights Network, National Health Program, National Respite Coalition, Paralyzed Veterans of America, Partnership for Inclusive Disaster Strategy, Special Needs Alliance, TASH, the Association of Persons with Severe Handicaps, the ARC of the United States, and United Spinal Association, UCP.
Where can we get that document?
I can give it to Chris to copy, and it comes from an organization called the Consortium for Citizens with Disabilities. Then, my wonderful comrade by the name of Moss, Henry Moss, has put together this spectacular plan for incorporating long-term care into the New York Health Act, which is a brilliant, simple explanation of how it's all going to work and how it's going to be paid for and who's going to benefit from it. So these two docs are pieces that I would love to be able to somehow, make sure that you get. They should go, yes ma'am.
Pass around that people take pictures.
Certainly. Anything you want. You're leaving. Take care, brother. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming.
I love Bill.
Thank you. Thank you, my sweet friend. Listen, I've talked long enough. There's a lot to say. But I've taken up a lot of your time, and I'd like to hear from you. I'd like to, kind of make sure that you guys speak. Malachi.
Thank you very much, Bill.
There's a mic there. Let me get you
My
on.
name is Malachi McCourt, and we have been friends for a good number of years, and I appreciate all that you-
Hello.
I appreciate your coming here and keeping the fires lit. I'm 87, so I'm in what they call the departure lounge. For the fire, but we need, as you said, new leaders and voices of fire and of passion.
Yes.
And this is the only, as far as I know, this is the only college built on a concentration camp. Belsen and Auschwitz are just monuments, but this college is built in a place that you showed in those pictures here today. And I think that within this college today, looking at the young people that are here, I think and I hope that you have inspired some of the young folks here that are listening to you today, young women, young men, who will decide that they will not have one of those shitty jobs in a box for the century because they can't afford medical care, but they will be able to rise to principle, to humanity,
Right.
to compassion, to love, so that they will get on the job of, it's perfectly all right. If you take the job, I will follow you in my wheelchair or wherever I am. We all will, no matter what age we are. So I would say to young people here, there's nothing you can't do in this country, and one of these things you can do, you can go for the goal of decency, humanity, generosity, and what I call real patriotism, which is looking after us who need your care.
Thanks, man. Mark, let me just say one quick thing. There's another flyer out there that is the flyer for David Good's magnificent book called The History and Sociology of Willowbrook State School. It's a must-read. It's the best book that's been written about the inside and the outside of Willowbrook that I've seen published yet. Yes, Mark, go ahead, please.
The last number I heard is 140 million people get their health care through work.
Say it again?
140 million people
Yes.
get their health care through work.
Yes.
They're employed. I never quite figured out.
They get health coverage. They don't get health care.
So I never quite figured out why large corporations who compete with international corporations in Europe who don't provide health coverage for their employees, why aren't they out in front with a Medicare for all system?
Okay. Did everybody get the question? So look here. Here's what I've learned. When you see something that doesn't make sense, it's because you don't think about it in a sensical way. If something is happening, it was done that way to benefit somebody. So if Ford or General Motors, who could save 20% on every car they make on the US side of the American-Canadian border, don't support single-payer health care, you've got to ask yourself why. What's the payoff for them? It may not just be dollars. It may also be because there are key people on the Ford board and on the GM board that are also on the Pfizer board or on the Aetna board, so that there are these interlocking board situations, and there's a certain solidarity among the oligarchy that they don't want to screw each other, and they know that if we had universal comprehensive care that freed them of that 20%, that makes them uncompetitive at a certain level, that there would be a consequence to them. Well, what is that consequence? What would make it worse for them to not have to lose that 20%? And you've got to think that way. There is a reason why they don't want this to work, because if it works, we, the people, will be empowered, and our democracy will fundamentally be re-established in America, because the process of redistributing these gigantic hospital complexes that have been concentrated to provide local comprehensivity at the most local level in all of society, rural, farm areas, cities, poor areas, whatever, requires a public utility decision-making process from the national level to the state level to the county to the city to the locale. There have to be organizations of you that essentially will have to make decisions of where the next MRI goes. Because that money, all that money is going to be publicly decided upon, because it's going to be in a public treasury. That's what they mean when they say the government's going to run the healthcare system, which they use as an argument against single payer. Who is the government? We are potentially the government if we choose to take on that struggle. And it is a worthwhile struggle. You took the struggle on to Willowbrook, and look, we won. I mean, this is not bragging. I decided I was going to bring this place down by myself. Why? because that pig that ran the place fired all the teachers, because the teachers asked him, please, to have the ward workers support their work in the afternoon and evening shifts and to keep the training working for this token group of people. And the bastard fired all the teachers. And I thought, that's the end of that. He's a done dog. And I began organizing. And I tried organizing the workers, because I came here because I was one of the physicians for the Black Panther Party on the Eastern Seaboard. And I thought this was the largest black factory, that there would be a lot of Panthers here. There were none. Instead, what there was a public union, CSEA, with administrators in the same union as the workers, so nothing was happening there, and a black nationalist union that essentially had every membership card automatically go to the Attorney General. Didn't smell right to me. And so the only leftover constituency that had the chops to bring about the change were the parents. And so we had to go to the parents, and organizing the parents was a piece of cake. All we had to do was let them in the door. Open the door, let them see the truth of this monstrosity. They were not allowed in the buildings. The workers would bring the kid to the door and propel them out for the weekend or whatever. They were not allowed in the buildings. And so Mike and I began having parent meetings in our buildings and asking the parents and the workers to talk to each other about what would make a difference. And it was a prairie fire. And then the Marcarios, the man who just stood up, was the head of the Down syndrome organization in the community. And then fortunately, because I was trained by one of the finest pediatricians in child development in the country in Los Angeles at Children's Hospital, I knew everybody in the field in the world. And so I just began inviting my teacher to come to look at Willowbrook and then give a talk outside in the community to the families, to bring Gunnar Dibwad, who was the head of the Association of Retarded Citizens, in, to bring Bengt Nerhi in, to bring Bengt Nicholson in, to bring everybody I knew that was a world-class child development killer, to come to look at this thing and then to talk about what the alternative is, because they knew what the alternative was. They didn't talk about how bad this was. Everybody pretty much knew how bad this was. All they had to do was put out how good it could be if this bad thing wasn't there, because this bad thing was a black hole. It was sucking up all the money. All the money was going here. There was no money going to the community, none. And Hammond, the director of the institution, essentially had sign-off on every public grant coming into the county because he was the chief state officer in the community. So you got to understand, this thing, the iniquity happens at a very high level and then it just drips down. It infects everything below it. But you got to not attack an intermediary or a symptom of the problem. You got to go to the origin of the problem. You got to understand that this meant big money for Nelson Rockefeller and an expansion of Republican hegemony in the state of New York for a long time. These public works. Yes, sir.
As somebody who witnessed a population of disabled people in the hands of bureaucracy.
Yes, sir.
Currently in New York State, there is Medical Aid and Dying Act is being considered. And I'm gathering you from California.
What is that called? Medical aid and?
Medical Aid and Dying Act.
Dying Act.
Dying Act.
It's a piece of legislation in New York? Yeah, what does it offer?
I'm sorry?
What does it give us?
That's by insurance.
Medical Aid and Dying.
Oh, I understand. Suicide, right. Right. Assisted suicide.
It's been sponsored by, in the Senate by our Senator Savino.
Yeah.
And co-sponsored by Paul.
Yeah.
But what is your take on that, having witnessed a large population which would be endangered, is my belief, by this legislation?
My first cousin just jumped off a 7-story building last week and killed herself. She lives in Rome. I just got the message from another first cousin that lived in Paris. People have to have the right they have to have the right to, if they have their faculties, to choose how to end their journey. Now, the danger is our community that may or may not be able to provide informed consent. And that's a real danger, and there have to be safeguards in place to do that. That's a political discourse that has to be held. It's not good or bad in the abstract as a totality. It's only bad if it is used to exterminate unwanted people, elders or whatever, prematurely, people with special needs prematurely, right? It's a powerful and meaningful conversation that can be used as an organizing tool if you're not rigid about the solution. What you want to do is you want to get at the process somehow or another so that you can work it. The only way we can live is through policy legislation. We live in this country, and short of a change in the whole nature of governance, we've got to deal with the governing apparatus. The problem is to make sure that the people in office are honest. The people who stopped the single-payer bill this last year in California, the Speaker of the Assembly, refused to let the bill out of committee to be heard, to be amended, and he gets $450,000 from the health industry. Public knowledge.
May I press the point?
Please.
Had that been legislation like that in effect in New York State, when you were here at Willowbrook?
No, this is all new.
I'm asking, was there?
Oh, no, I'm saying,
Had there been?
oh, yes.
What we from your view, because I think you have sort of a unique view here, having gone through that and seeing what bureaucracies could be like. What do you think that would have been like? What would have happened to Willowbrook? I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. Let me tell you that the people who ran Willowbrook were totally incompetent, and they were idiots. They needed to be in the institution. They pretended like they knew what they were doing, but they didn't really know what they were doing, and I don't think that there would have been a killing field here apart from the killing field caused by the deprivation that was universal in the place. Not adequate food, not adequate environment, not adequate anything. There wasn't anything that worked here, nothing. So they needed those people for money. No matter how near dead a person was, they needed to keep them here in order to get that Medicaid reimbursement. It would not have been in the interests of the state to eliminate their unwanted population. They're too valuable a commodity in order to fund the system. Does that answer your question?
It does answer my question.
There was another hand. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I wanted to know how those pictures that you showed were obtained.
I shot most of them. They were shot by many photographers that came in when the expose happened. My book, Public Hostage, will have 100 of these pictures, but they won't look fuzzy like this. They'll be really beautiful. I don't know exactly when it's going to come out, but I'm hoping to finish it by the end of this year. Eddie?
Bill, I think we need to end soon here.
I'm sorry?
I think we need to end soon.
I thought we were going to 4:30.
There's another class coming in at 4:30. We also have refreshments outside for everyone.
Okay, can I take a couple more questions?
One
Yeah.
quick question.
Please.
AARP represents a significant number
Of insurance.
of people, a lot of whom have not yet been on Medicare. They're between 50 and 65.
Yep.
Plus all the Medicare people. In your organizing, do you know what position, if any, they have taken on these two bills in Congress?
They're against. AARP represents the insurance industry. They're a quasi-insurer that masquerades as an elder organization. They're not. And it's like the NRA. It's like the NRA. The head people at the AARP, they may be polite, they may be nice, they may be social, they may be beautiful, but they're the opposition.
As a follow-up, I am aware, and I actually looked at the 1099 that AARP is required to file.
Yeah.
And there's over 15 staff members making over $500,000 a year plus benefits.
Right.
And I was curious to see what their income was from their affinity programs. and it neared $1 million.
Exactly. Listen, you haven't thought about the meaning of single payer in terms of the entire disability defense network. What's going to happen to ARC, to UCP, to epilepsy, to autism, to cancer, to breast cancer? All those organizations that are now there to compensate for this grossly inhuman system won't have to do that anymore. They're going to have to find another role to play, which has to be political. It has to be to clean the system up and to transform, which will take a decade. Once we have single payer, it'll take a decade in order to reorganize the concentration of services in the society to get them to where they're really serving the people, which means there's going to have to be built in a tiered democratic decision-making process made up of ordinary people in order to change the lay of the land. Yes, sir, ma'am.
In New York, we're going to a managed care system in 2 or 3 years.
Exactly.
What are your
Listen, single payer will wipe that out. Managed care means that there is a third-party middleman that's going to tell your doctor what he or she can or can't do. Out. Out. The insurance industry has to be outlawed and eliminated entirely from the conversation. You will not be able to buy out of single payer in America. And single payer in America, which has twice the dollars of every other country on earth in terms of what's going on in terms of its medical services, will essentially be the most advanced and the most comprehensive and the simplest system on the planet. There won't be a dual system like they have in Britain. There won't be a triple system like there is in Israel, or Australia or Japan, all of whom have variations but highly regulated services so that it's not working like America. America is the most vile, the most inhuman, the most money-grubbing system on the planet with twice the amount of money. So we're getting there, and here's the hard part. Somebody was saying, Jim Conroy, who's sitting in here somewhere, was saying how, yes, Jim, I'm sorry, forgive me, that this is a lifetime struggle. We're not going to see the end of this, but every day you can align yourself to make a strategic difference. I just want to invite you to think big. Taking out Willowbrook meant going against the governor of New York. And in order to get there, I had to be able to set up a network strong enough, caring enough, angry enough, loving enough to go after the governor with a federal class action lawsuit. That's who this suit was against. It was against the governor of New York. And so if you have to take on the state, it may be easier than taking on your friends that are opposing you in some little operation that you're doing, which takes up the same amount of time as going after the governor. Let's fix the system. Then we'll work with our friends that we're having differences with. Thank you. So go ahead.
I just want to say I'm a student here.
Yeah.
CSL, and I just came here because of the extra credit for but then I came here because it was for extra credit, and I realized because I'm a student that works for DSP, Community Resources.
Yeah.
I definitely got really educated coming here. I just came for extra credit, and I realized this was about people with disabilities. And you definitely gave me like a motivation to become a voice for people to make a difference. So when you're talking about, young guy trying to step up, I do want to step up and be a leader to people with disabilities. And
What are you studying to do?
I'm a psychology major. So
Okay, so you're going to get your doctor's in psychology or your master's?
hopefully.
Good.
I don't really like school that
Good.
much, so.
We walk on 2 feet. You'll walk in psychology and you'll walk in justice.
So thank you for giving that motivation.
Thank you for your testimonial. I really appreciate it. Anybody else life changed? I want to thank the dean and his compatriots and the associate dean that are here, and and Chris, who put this together, and David Good, who helped put this together. I mean, this is an important conversation, really an important conversation, and it needs to continue. It needs to continue. Somehow or another, this has to happen at least once a week somehow in this framework so that you can talk the truth and you can deal with your pain, and you can also come to grips with the fact that you may not be able to knock off the top problem quickly. But trust me, I haven't worked on anything in my life that hasn't taken 10 years, minimum. Willowbrook took 30 years to close after the consent decree. Give me a break. I mean, you know, we wanted to bring the National Guard in and declare a national emergency to evacuate the place at the point that we filed suit. Never happened, and they fought us, and the question is whether this guy Lassner, or whatever his name is, the new commissioner, the head guy, is any different than the head guy, the head of mental health services in New York when we fought Willowbrook. This belongs in the education sector. This system, well, I mean, it's just a continuation. This college could become, and hopefully will become, a world leader in the most innovative thinking about transformation of society and generating a tertiary faculty to teach other people how to change society. I mean, that's what's got to happen. You can't learn dross and then take on, evil. You got to really have an imagination and at some level know that if you go down, it's worth it. It's worth it. It's worth it. The consequences are enormous. I mean, the emancipation is enormous if it happens. Listen, go and there's food to be had, and thank you very much for your patience.